I'm happy that I can be with you here via video and very excited about the day that you all have together talking about how to create a culture of radical generosity. And I want to start by giving an overview perspective on what does it in fact take to create a culture of generosity. What are some of the things that you might need to think about as you pursue this culture of generosity and stewardship at your church? Let me start by simply stating the obvious, and that's this, that there is something about generosity that is just hardwired into people to cause them to respond. When you see stories of generosity, when you hear them, when you see illustrations or acts of generosity, there is something on the inside of us. I think it's part of the way God has wired us as people made in the image of God. There's something on the inside of us that resonates, that jumps, that captures. If I were to ask you, for example, who's the most generous person you've ever encountered, no doubt somebody comes to mind kind of immediately in your life who has modeled for you generosity and stewardship and giving in a very compelling and even contagious or magnetic way. For me, I often think when I'm thinking about who in my life has modeled generosity for me, it's somebody that my wife Susan and I met many, many years ago when we were raising money to join the staff of Campus Crusade for Christ. We met a man, his name was Mr. Johnson, who was a rose grower, had a huge rose growing outfit. In fact, he would always give Susan a couple of dozen roses whenever we would meet him, which, you know, is a little bit weird when someone gives your wife roses, but he was like 85. So I thought if it came to that, I could probably handle myself with him. But anyway, having a conversation with Mr. Johnson was really very memorable for me because I asked him why it was that he was so generous. And his answer was compelling too. He sort of sat back and said, you know, it seems to me that the Lord's been very good to my family and me. And then he said this, he said, the more I give, the more the Lord blesses me. And it wasn't like he had made some sort of quid pro quo prosperity gospel kind of deal with God. It was more a genuine, sincere recognition that God is a generous God and that he has been blessed to be a blessing to others. It was really a cool moment for me. So now, for the past more than 10 years, I've worked with churches to try to help them understand what does it take to create a culture of generosity and stewardship and giving in your church. So I want to share a few of the things that I've learned from working with hundreds of churches over the years. So the very first one, these are questions that you'll want to ask yourself or ask your team as you're trying to cultivate generosity and stewardship in your church. First one is this: what do we believe about giving? That's the first slide. What do we believe about giving? One of the things we need to get straight is that generosity and stewardship are not exactly the same thing. Have you noticed that sort of generosity the word generosity has become kind of the flavor of the month? Everybody's using the word generosity, but no one is using the word stewardship anymore, which is really unfortunate because frankly, they don't mean the same thing. They're not synonyms for one another. You could Gunnar Johnson, who you'll actually meet a little bit later on today from Gateway Church, was the first person who taught me this. He sort of describes generosity and stewardship as two sides of the same coin, which I think is a nice little pun, frankly. You can't have both. You can't have generosity without stewardship, right? You can't be truly generous unless you're a good steward, or else you'll run out of money. You can really only be truly generous once, then you'll be out of money because you're a bad steward, right? And to be generous to be a steward without generosity is to sort of be a hoarder, to be selfish, to be greedy. God wants us to manage our money and then be generous with it, to balance both generosity and stewardship with one another. So having defined those two ideas, the question I'm asking you to consider at your church is this: what do you all believe about giving? You ask a typical pastor, hey, what is your model for teaching the Bible to your congregation? Normally they have an answer. Pastor, what's your model for discipleship or for local and global ministry or outreach? Normally they can explain to you, hey, this is how we do it. This is our strategy. This is our plan. Ask them, what is your model for teaching what the Bible says about generosity and stewardship? And a typical pastor might say, well, you know, we take an offering. which frankly just isn't enough, right? So one of the key things that I want to encourage you to think about is really sincerely ask, what do we believe about giving at our church? And not only what we believe, but what do we teach? What are we preaching? What are we modeling? What are we showing to the congregation about what we believe about generosity and stewardship? One of my friends, Chad Moore, from Sun Valley Community Church out in Gilbert, Arizona. We were just with Chad a couple of weeks ago as he was hosting one of our Leadership Network gatherings. Chad and his team have done a stunning job of answering the question, what do we believe about giving here at Sun Valley? And it's so compelling that if you ask a typical member of their church, not just a staff member, not an elder, but a typical member of their church, what do you believe? What does Sun Valley believe about giving? My guess is they would answer it for you. Because just about every week while they're doing the offering, Chad or someone will say something like this. It goes like this. We are going to receive an offering this morning because here's what the Bible teaches about money. We're to give first, save second, and live on the rest. Did you catch that? We're to give first, save second, and live on the rest. And then Chad or one of his team members will say something like this. God gave first, so we're a give first church. Giving first honors God. Saving second builds wealth, and living on the rest teaches contentment. Now, that simple statement that takes less than 30 seconds to say is so ingrained in the life of the church at Sun Valley that people there know the answer to the question, what do we believe about giving? Well, here's what we believe. We believe that we're to give first, save second, live on the rest. Why? Because giving first honors God, saving second builds wealth, and learning to live on the rest teaches contentment. It's like a stunning way of answering that question. So go back and think about this with your team. What do you all believe about giving? What do you teach about giving? What do you teach about tithing? What do you teach about the priority of giving? What do you teach about giving to your church? It is really important that you nail that down and establish that really, really clearly. That's the first big question that we want to ask. The second one there is on the next slide. It says this: what data are you tracking and sharing with your congregation? It is so important that as a ministry leader in your church, you are keeping track of data that will help you to see how well you're doing in this area of generosity and stewardship. I don't have a seminary degree, but I did get an MBA, and it's sort of iconic, this idea of somebody in business school saying you can't manage what you don't understand, and you don't understand what you don't measure. And I actually did hear that when I was in business school, and I believe it to be true and experienced it as a true truth, even in ministry when I was the executive pastor at Discovery Church in Orlando. So if it is critical for leaders to understand data, why is it so common for many leaders in the church to ignore giving data, or to not look at giving data, or to be sort of nervous or sort of afraid of giving data? I think it's important for pastors to have giving data because giving data reveals something very important. You may put it this way: every change in giving is a pastoral issue, and you won't be able to identify a change in giving if you're not looking at giving data. Did you catch that? Every change in giving is a pastoral issue. So we're not looking at giving data just so we can be better fundraisers. No, we're looking at giving data so that we can be more effective pastors, because it is so true that often when someone's giving craters, it's because there's something happening in their life spiritually, something happening personally. And the statistics will indicate that people's dollars tend to leave the church before they do. So getting a hold of this data can be very, very helpful. One of my friends a number of years ago called somebody in his congregation whose giving had really kind of cratered to find out what was going on. And the question was simply, how are you? It wasn't, hey, I've been looking at the giving data and, you guys are behind. What's the story there? No, it was just, how are you? And what he heard was, well, we recently had to put our 27-year-old son into rehab, drug rehab. And when you put a kid in rehab like that who has no insurance and no job, we had to write like a $40,000 check. So it's been really, really difficult for us as a family. So the pastor's response was, oh, no wonder you're not giving. No, he basically said, okay, let's get some people around you. Let's get some people praying for you and supporting you. It was the change in giving that revealed this pastoral issue. Really important that we keep track of that and pay attention to that idea. It's important that you not only track good data so that you can work with it, so that you can keep an eye on it, changes in giving, first-time gifts, larger than usual gifts. Many churches I work with, they have some sort of a standard for any gift above X. Maybe it's above $5,000. Maybe it's $10,000. Who knows what it might be. The problem with that model is that if a person sort of gives $100 a month, faithfully, and then writes a $1,500 check, they probably wouldn't trigger your large gift special letter. But for them, that is a huge special gift, and it would be really, really great if somebody could follow them up and maybe say something like, you know, you need to know that we're not staring at giving data all day long, but we do get alerted when someone gives a very, very generous gift. I want to ask you this question, and this is the question I would ask. What is God doing in your life that caused you to give that gift? Wouldn't you love to ask that question to someone who's just given a large gift in your church so that you can encourage them and just say, listen, I just want you to know, as one of the pastors, one of the leaders here in our church, we're really, really grateful and proud of you and really thankful for your partnership in this ministry. Very, very seldom will you have somebody be upset about congratulating them or thanking them for that kind of thing. What data are you tracking? But also, what data are you sharing with your congregation? I hope you aren't doing this, but many churches are, kind of in that weekly bulletin. If your church still prints a weekly bulletin, maybe you're tracking or recording or reporting giving data. Last week's expected giving was X, but what was given actually was Y. What's really kind of crazy about that is that in many churches, what gets reported as last week's budgeted giving is really just 1/52nd of the total annual budget. But I have news for you. I've done this for a long time. I have never worked with a church that got its entire budget in 52 equal installments. It doesn't work that way. So when you communicate, our budget was this, but we got that, your budget really wasn't that. You didn't actually expect to get that much money that week. You had some other number that you knew based on what month it was, based on what week it was, whether it's the first week of the month, whether it's the third week of the month. You have better way of tracking that, but what you're reporting to your congregation is actually not very, very helpful. So it's not only important that you track giving information, but what are you reporting about giving information? Are you providing quarterly updates to the people in your congregation? Do you do an annual report that shows, hey, this is everything that we did as a church last year. This is where all the money went. And we're so grateful for everybody's partnership with us in this effort. It is really important that you both track and share good giving data with your congregation. Okay, next big idea is this. Are we modeling good stewardship? This is so important. It is so important for pastors to realize that generous churches are led by generous leaders, and we need to model that we are also being generous with the resources that God has entrusted to us. And that modeling goes in a couple of ways. It goes in how we are spending the dollars that God has entrusted to us, and then in how we are releasing them into ministry elsewhere. Are you spending money in a way that is wise and is good stewardship, and the people in your congregation know that and see that? It's possible that you're spending money wisely and well, but you're not telling people that. So you're not providing information or reports or data that can show them. It's also possible that there may be some spending going on in your church that is kind of hard to explain or that people don't get. I was working with a large multi-site church, and talking to some of their largest major givers. And I asked this question of one woman who was in the room. I said, what keeps you from giving more than you do now? She was already a pretty generous giver. What keeps you from giving more than you do now? And what her answer was, it floored me. She basically said, well, I just feel like if I give more money, they'll just buy more flat screen TVs. which was like, what? Basically, what it communicated was that she did not fully get why it was that they were spending resources on technology in the church. Now, I know that church had a good reason for why they were spending money on technology, but they were not communicating that well. So it didn't look like good stewardship to the congregation, at least in this woman's case. Another thing to keep in mind is your staff. I think Andy Stanley put it this way: never use your payroll for benevolence. Meaning, do you have anybody on your staff team that you are spending God's money on who is really not doing the job, or doing the job the way they could or the way they should, but you're keeping them on because, they're a part of the team, they're connected, you love them. You really have to be very, very thoughtful about how it is that you are spending money in your congregation, because that stewardship models for others stewardship, which causes them to want to be more generous with your congregation. So are we modeling? Are we modeling in the way we're spending? Also, are we modeling in the way we're releasing dollars outside the four walls of our church? Is your church generous? Is your church raising funds to spend only inside the four walls of your church? Or are you sending dollars out and communicating that in a way that your church can understand and is compelling? I'm so blown away by some of these churches. I think the very first time I heard about this was from Dave and John Ferguson at Community Christian Church in Naperville, Illinois, Chicago. Basically, they budget their year on 51 weeks, and they give 1 full week of offerings away every single year in something they call the celebration of generosity. And I love that. It's amazing. And in fact, listen to this. That weekend is one of the highest attended weekends of their church year all year. It's like Christmas and Easter for them, because people say, listen, you got to come to our church. You're not going to believe what's going to happen this weekend. Our people are going to give all this money away. And so what they're doing is they are communicating that we're not holding on tightly just for us to the resources that you're giving. We're actually using it well outside the four walls. Okay, next big idea is this. Do we talk to different types of givers, different kinds of givers differently? What's weird about church is that we have this model where one person stands in front of a group and talks to them all at once. The problem with that is you can never actually nuance your communication, because you're trying to sort of communicate in a way that everybody gets. And in giving, this can really be a problem, because pastors, how many times have you stood in front of the congregation and said something like this? Hey, I just want to thank you all for giving so generously here at our church. The problem with that statement is this: not everybody who heard that statement is giving. And not everybody who's giving, to be honest, is giving generously. But because you were speaking one to many, you sort of communicated this blanket statement for everybody. Instead, our goal is to speak to different kinds of givers differently. Speak to non-givers in a way that is very different than people who are your leading givers. Speak to brand new givers who are just starting to grow in giving in a different way than sort of mature givers who need to be challenged to take a step of faith and really go for it. You have to speak to different kinds of givers differently. There are all kinds of different audiences in your church. There are high capacity givers, people that God has blessed with wealth. There are young, very young givers. I mean, I'd like to have $1 for every time a pastor said to me, what are we going to do about millennials? Golly, these millennials are not giving. And the truth is that millennials will be motivated to give if we can communicate with them in a way that is compelling. By the way, if you want to look at listen to a great podcast, we did a podcast with Julie Bullock a few months ago on millennials and giving. But I will tell you that one of the things that she said is the problem with pastors and millennials is we think of them as a homogeneous group. Just because a person is in their 20s or under 30 doesn't make them like everybody else in that category. There are some 20-somethings who are sleeping on their parents' sofa and delivering pizza. There are others who are married with kids and maybe running their own business, or maybe have a professional career somewhere. So saying millennials don't get it is really missing the point. It's often that we don't get that there are different kinds of people. We need to speak to different kinds of givers differently. One of the other audiences that we need to speak to differently, believe it or not, are women. Many of the messages from pastors to the congregation about giving are targeted man to man, if you will. We're forgetting that in many cases, women have a unique and God-given unique perspective on money, on giving, on why they give, on how they enjoy hearing about giving opportunities. That's why I'm so excited that a little bit later on today, you're going to get to hear from Charlotte Bickley, who is just a tremendous leader and has some great things to say, not only about women giving, but also about high capacity givers who God has blessed with wealth. It's important to recognize that we have to have different kinds of conversations. This diagram here with the triangles on the next slide, I think nicely illustrates this issue, and I'll just hit it quickly. The people that God has blessed with wealth, those that have the most financial capacity, are generally speaking a small number of people in your church, but when they give, the percentage of the dollars given is larger than one might expect. And then the biggest group of people, sort of that congregation, just sort of the rank and file members of your church, when they give, there's a lot of them, but when they give, it often results in a small amount of money. Now, then there's everybody in the middle. Now, if you were just trying to raise money, if you were just doing fundraising, all you would do is talk to the people that God has blessed with money. You wouldn't even talk to these regular Joe lunch bucket people. Golly, they don't have any money anyway. But we don't do it that way, right? We don't talk just to them because it isn't about raising money from them. It's about helping them grow spiritually. It's about helping them get it. But we do have to have different kinds of conversations with different kinds of people in the congregation, which leads me to this next big issue, and that is this. Are we fundraising or disciple making? Now, the reason why this follows what we just said a moment ago is because what I was saying is that if you were just trying to raise money, you wouldn't really even bother with just the regular people, just the normal people in your church, right? Because when you talk to them, their giving doesn't really amount to much. But we talk to them, we encourage them, we reach out to them, not because of what we want from them, but because of what we want for them. We want them to grow spiritually. We want them to see that stewardship is part of discipleship, that giving is part of growing. And so we talk to everybody about generosity and stewardship and giving because it's a part of spiritual formation. It's a part of discipleship. It's a part of what it means to be a growing Christian. And it's really important that you get that you recognize that at Leadership Network, our goal is not to help you be a better fundraiser in your church, but rather to help you recognize that generosity and stewardship are part of spiritual formation, part of discipleship, part of what it means to grow in Christ likeness. And as leaders in the church, we want to help people move in that direction. We are in the people raising business, not in the fundraising business. And this is really, really so important. In order to help people grow spiritually, to help them grow in this kind of journey of becoming a more generous person, often we need to give them a pathway. We need to give them a model. We need to help them see what it looks like to grow spiritually in this area. At Leadership Network, one of the things we like to say is that no model is perfect, but some are useful. So I'd like to show you how do I put it? I'd like to show you an imperfect model of what it looks like to help people grow in this area of giving, but I think it will be very, very helpful, okay? And that's on the next slide. It's called the Giving Ladder or the Generosity Ladder. This was first put together by somebody named Nelson Searcy, wrote a great book entitled, I think, The Generosity Ladder. But anyway, his language and his wording is a little bit different than what you see here. And frankly, the language and the wording on this Generosity Ladder is not perfect, right? It's an imperfect model. But what it shows you is the progression of a person who's a first-time giver, who then becomes an occasional giver, and then maybe a more intentional giver who actually sets aside an amount of money, and then a tither who's really thinking about giving proportionally, and then finally recognizing that there's a step even beyond tithing that a person can go to. Now, again, don't get too bogged down in this particular model because it's not perfect. But the question is this: are you showing your people what it looks like for them to grow in this area of generosity and giving? Have you given them a tool that helps them to quickly assess, here's where I am, and here's where I need to go next. Here's where I am, and here's where I need to go next. I'm trying to figure out how much time I have left here. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the pace. So let's go ahead and keep going. Next big idea, which is also huge, is this. Are we nailing the offering time? This is critically important. It is so important. I spent 18 years on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. I did major donor development. I did a lot of fundraising. And of course, in order to do that work, I had to go to the people who funded the work that I was a part of, writing letters, visiting. In the church, the people that fund the work of our ministry come to us every single week and sit down. And yet we squander those opportunities often, especially on the weekend when we do the offering. So many of us, that offering time is just, now is the time of the service when the blah, blah, blahs will come forward. We're going to continue to worship God by giving back to him a portion of what God has entrusted to us. There just may be some rote language that you do without thinking about it. I want to really encourage you to take the time to make those few moments in your service as impactful, as powerful as they can possibly be, because it's so critical that you use those moments to tell stories, maybe to share scripture, to use statistics, to give people access to what they need to understand, to teach them about generosity and stewardship and giving, instead of just collecting an offering. Use it as a moment to inspire, to encourage, to inform, and to really, really engage people in this area of generosity and stewardship. One of the cool ways to do it, believe it or not, again, this is a tip I picked up from Gabe Ferguson at Community Christian. For years in their offering time, what they've done is a monthly theme. So their offering time has kind of a monthly theme. So this, well, for example, hey, all during the month of April, as we get to this, they call it the Giving Back to God time at Community, which I think is kind of cool. All during the month of April, when we get to our Giving Back to God time, we're talking about how giving produces faith in the giver. And then maybe they'll share a verse. Maybe the next week they'll show a story of someone whose giving helped grow them in their faith in Jesus Christ. Maybe another time there'll be some sort of a particular opportunity for people to give and step out in faith. All that to say, they keep reiterating and rehearsing the faith theme each week during that month. Then the next month, they do a new theme. Now, that may seem kind of cheesy, but actually I think it's brilliant, because what it does is it allows you to really focus your people on some particular things. Best thing you can do for your offering, gang, is to evaluate it. Set somebody up in the back of your auditorium with an iPhone or a camera. Record what's happening during the offering. Record several weeks of it, maybe. If you're a multi-site campus, record it on all of your campuses. Put together a loop. Get all the people in the room that are involved in the offering or help planning the worship service, and start playing those offering times and evaluate them. Give them a grade. Wow, that one was really, really good. It was engaging. I was encouraged. I was inspired. Next one. Yeah, that one was terrible. There was nothing there, blah, 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 right? Because you know that's happening sometimes. This will never get better if you don't actually intentionally focus on getting it better. Okay, next big idea. And this is really the last one we're going to talk about. And that's this. Are our staff and leaders growing in giving? This is essential. Generous churches are led by generous leaders. And if you have people in your church in leadership positions who are not intentionally growing in this area of generosity and stewardship and giving, you got problems. And I'll tell you, here's what it looks like. Lead pastor gets up there and gives a great message on generosity, stewardship, and giving. Maybe it's challenging, maybe it's encouraging. No matter what, it's right there, right out of the Bible. Teaches a great message. People go to their small group that night. Maybe there's a new person in the small group, and the new person sort of confides in the group. You know, I got to be honest with you. I don't really like when pastors talk about giving. I don't really like when they talk about money. Now, is it wrong for a brand new small group member to say that? No. In fact, I'm glad they said it. I think that's great. Get it out there. That's how they're feeling, right? What's wrong is when the small group leader says, yeah, me too. That's the problem. or when the staff members' enthusiasm for this issue is so obviously not where it needs to be, or the elder, or the deacon, or the trustee, or the board member. And sometimes what they're saying is that they're with you, but they're not really with you in their actual giving. And that will undermine the work of your church in this area. Generous churches are led by generous givers. And when there's a problem with generosity, when there's a problem with giving in the church, it is often a result of a leader or leaders who are not also growing in this journey of giving. Now, I'm not talking about some specific amount of money that they have to be giving at. That may be your church's policy. All staff, for example, have to tithe to our church. If that's your church's policy, I have no quarrel with that. But what I'm suggesting is that the more important issue is, are the leaders in your church, are they growing in their giving, or are they stuck? And do you know it? Is someone looking at it? And if you're looking at it, is someone having a conversation with them about it? Is someone inviting them to step up? I'm not talking about a gotcha conversation. I'm talking about an encouraging conversation that might be helpful for them. I think I'm going to wrap up here because I think that's really all the time that I have for my session. A couple of quick slides I want to show you. One is that if you or your church would like to get deeper into this issue of how do you create a culture of generosity and stewardship and giving in your church, I would recommend that you check out the Leadership Network Hub. It's a great cohort type strategy for digging into generosity, stewardship. John or Jeff Kosak or one of the guys there can give you information about that. Then the next slide will just show you that there's a couple of other resources that I want to recommend. Forgive me for the shameless plug, but you may benefit from reading the book that Jim Shepard and I wrote called Contagious Generosity. And we're also really proud of this podcast that we just started recently. And there's some great interviews there. We've been doing it for almost a year, and I think you may find some good stuff there as well. So you can create a culture of generosity and stewardship and giving in your church if you will tackle these questions that we've talked about and if you'll lean in, and I know you can do it. Thanks for giving me a chance to be here with you.